¿Qué ha pasado? Ayer, como sabéis, nuestro amigo Sam Bankman-Fried, ex CEO y fundador del exchange FTX, estuvo o compareció o participó en una, pues eso, en una entrevista, ¿no? Una entrevista que ya estaba organizada, un evento que por cierto costaba como $2.000, $3.000 acudir, no me acuerdo exactamente cuánto era, pero bueno, ha sido ampliamente difundido por internet el evento. Y en este evento, pues básicamente, supongo que inicialmente, porque esto fue antes de la caída de FTX que se lo invitó, inicialmente la idea era, pues, oye, hablar de las perspectivas del mundo cripto, hablar un poquito, pues, de FTX como exchange, etcétera, ¿no? De cosas un poquito más normales, como quien dice. Pero evidentemente, a medio camino de lo que se convocó este evento y en, pues, en lo que se ha realizado, que fue ayer 29 de noviembre, perdón, ayer 30 de noviembre, resulta pues que las cosas han cambiado significativamente en los últimos días y el enfoque de la participación del señor Sam Bankman-Fried ha pasado a ser un poco la de what happened, ¿no? ¿Qué ha pasado? ¿Qué ha pasado? Es decir, ¿qué ha pasado? Esto dura una hora, así que tampoco vamos a verlo todo porque sería esto larguísimo, lo podéis encontrar en YouTube. Pero básicamente en la entrevista pues se le pregunta un poco, pues eso, al señor Sam Bankman-Fried se le da la oportunidad para que en vivo y en directo en la entrevista hasta ayer pudiese justificar un poquito qué es lo que ha hecho, por qué lo ha hecho y qué es lo que ha pasado. Vamos a escuchar la primera pregunta del periodista o del presentador y vamos a ver cuál es la respuesta de nuestro amigo Sam Bankman-Fried. Y por cierto, mucho ojo al lenguaje no verbal.
There are people who are angry, and they are seeking answers. I just want everybody in the audience to know that I received thousands of letters and emails, even in the past couple of days, from a lot of these people who feel like they're victims. And some of them have questioned whether we should have this conversation, whether we should have this interview. There are people who don't believe that this conversation should happen. And I just want to say that I think our job as journalists is...
Subtítulos en español.
To have those conversations, is to ask those questions and seek those answers on behalf of the public. And that is especially true right now. Sam, here's where I want to start this conversation, if we could. I think at this point there are two ways to view what has happened at FTX. And I know we'll get into all of the details in a moment. But I'm just going to go very basic. There's a generous view, and the generous view is that you are a young man who made a series of terrible, terrible, very, very bad decisions. The less generous view is that you have committed a massive fraud, that this is a Ponzi scheme, a manipulation of the system. And I want to start there because I think that there are so many people who have that question, which is, what is this? And what did happen?
Yeah, look, thanks for having me. And at the end of the day, I was CEO of FTX. And that means whatever happened, wherever it happened, I had a duty. I had a duty to all of our stakeholders, to our customers, our creditors. I had a duty to our employees, to our investors, and to the regulators in the world to do right by them, to make sure the right things happened at the company. And clearly, I didn't do a good job of that. Clearly, I made a lot of mistakes or things I would give anything to be able to do over again. I didn't ever try to commit fraud on anyone.
No.
I was excited about the prospects of FTX a month ago.
Súper emocionado.
I saw it as a thriving, growing business.
Sure.
I was shocked by what happened this month. And, reconstructing it, where are there things I wish I had done differently?
Well, let's talk about some of the things you would want to have done differently.
But si llevamos más plata, quizás. Perdón.
For folks, because it's a lot of big numbers.
Perdón,
and often doesn't feel human. One of the letters I got, I want to read to you, Sam, because it's from a gentleman who said that he lost his life savings. And the subject line is, Sam Bankman-Fried stole $2 million from me.
$2 millones perdió la persona.
Says Andrew,
La carta.
can you please ask SBF why he decided to steal my life savings? And the $10 billion more from customers to give to his hedge fund, Alameda.
O sea, le pregunta, dice, por favor, ¿le puedes preguntar a Sam por qué decidió robarme $2 millones? Y Sam así. O sea, ¿tú te lo puedes creer? O sea, estoy intentando no cabrearme, pero es que ¿tú te lo puedes creer? $2 millones. Sí. Venga, sigamos.
Can you ask him why his hedge fund was leveraging long all of these S coins? I'm going to keep it polite for the kids. Please ask him if he thinks what happened was fraud. These are the kinds of letters that I've been getting repeatedly over the past several days. What do you tell this man?
Yeah. I mean, I'm deeply sorry about what happened.
Lo siento mucho.
Here's, the long and short of what happened. And I'll start by saying, just to make a distinction here, you look at the US platform, you look at the international platform. The US platform is a US regulated platform with American users. To my knowledge, that's fully solvent. That's fully funded.
Estados Unidos está perfecto.
No
os preocupéis.
I believe that withdrawals could be opened up today, and everyone could be made whole from that. That none of these problems plague.
De gusto le están reteniendo la plata.
Then you look at the international platform, for their non-US users. And I mean, as the letter says, Alameda Research did have a long position. And the international platform, it's a margin trading platform. It's a derivatives platform. It's a platform where all the clients were, going on, placing something as collateral and using that to put on a position, whether that's a futures position, a spot position, a borrow. And, what the exchange was storing was the collateral from all of those positions. Alameda Research was, one of those that put on positions there. And as I try and reconstruct this, over the last month, I have limited access to data, but my view of it, from what I have been able to see, is roughly that, basically, look, a year ago, Alameda had, I think, something like 10% leverage. Had something like 10 times the assets of the position that it had on.
¿Y?
Over the course of the last year, there were a number of market crashes that drove the value of those assets down and the leverage up. I think it was, to my knowledge, still under 2x leverage, as of a month ago. You look at what happened this month, and in a few days, all out, PR assault, which led to a total market collapse in a pretty short period of time, no bid-side liquidity. I think more than $10 billion wiped off in the matter of days. And realistically speaking, no ability for FTX to be able to liquidate that position and generate everything that was owed from it.
But I think the bigger question
¿Y la explicación cuál es?
Where Alameda got the loan from, which is to say that there is a view that this is about commingling of funds.
Le preguntaron, la pregunta fue, ¿qué le dices a este señor que te dice que le has robado $2 millones? ¿Cuál es la respuesta? Lo siento mucho. Lo siento mucho. A ver, Alameda estaba apalancado. Bueno, yo los números no tengo acceso a ellos, pero ¿qué clase de respuesta es esa? ¿Qué clase de respuesta es esa?
And in that letter that I just read you, this gentleman actually copy and pasted the terms of service for FTX into the email. And I just want to read you this. It says, none of the digital assets in your account are the property of or shall or may be loaned to FTX Trading. FTX Trading does not represent or treat digital assets in users' accounts as belonging to FTX Trading. So how is it possible that Alameda had this loan of such a large size?
Claro, si los términos de servicio de FTX dicen que eso no se puede hacer, entonces ¿por qué se hacía? Eso es lo que él está preguntando, ¿no?
So there's that piece from the terms of service, but there were a number of other parts of the terms of service and a number of other parts of the platform on top of that. There is the borrow lending facility, where users were lending billions of dollars.
Cacho de los términos de eso. Tecnicismo de abogados.
You had obviously futures contracts.
Eso lo escribió el becario del departamento jurídico.
Of course, all of this.
Por favor.
It's meant to.
Eso se lo copiamos, le hicimos un copy-paste de los términos de servicio de Binance, por favor. Así funciona esto, no os hagáis los sorprendidos, ¿no? Fuimos a Binance.com, pusimos términos de servicios, cogimos el ratón, control C, nos fuimos ahí, control V y ya está. Así es. ¿Quién lee eso, eh? ¿Quién lee los términos del servicio? Por favor. Sí, ¿qué pregunta, no? ¿Esa?
Be the case that these are positions where FTX could, if it needed to, margin call those positions and close them down in time such that it would cover all of those, all those shorts, all those liabilities. Obviously, that wasn't the case here, and that's a massive failure of oversight, of risk management, and of responsibility from myself running FTX.
But just make this very straight. Was there commingling of funds? That's what it appears like. It appears like there's been a genuine commingling of the funds of FTX customers that were not supposed to be commingled with your separate firm.
I didn't knowingly commingle funds. And again, one piece of this, you have the margin trading. You have, customers borrowing from each other. Alameda is one of those. I was frankly surprised by how big Alameda's position was, which points to another failure of oversight on my part, and failure to appoint someone to be chiefly in charge of that. But I wasn't trying to commingle funds.
Eso, es que soy tonto, no me quise robar nada. Vale.
Told Alameda staffers that Alameda used FTX client funds to cover loans that were being recalled because of the Luna-triggered credit crunch.
Alameda usó fondos de FTX.
She, Sam, Gary were aware of this. How do you square that with what you originally said over Twitter, that this was an $8 billion accounting mistake?
So I'll point to two things. And first of all, obviously, I don't know what anyone else is thinking here. I can only talk about it from what I know, from what I knew. And a lot of this is reconstructing it over the last month. I have limited access to data, but
¿Os dais cuenta cómo insiste en que él tenía un acceso limitado a la información? O sea, él es el CEO, fundador y CEO de FTX, pero... Y que, por cierto, yo sé que esto no lo digo desde un punto de vista de meterme en su vida personal, pero sí para que veáis el nivel de conocimientos que tenía. Además era novio de la CEO de Alameda Research, ¿verdad? Y estaba metido en todo lajo, con los reguladores también. Es decir, vamos a ver, pero él no se enteraba de nada, ¿no? Yo creo que se vio los juicios se tiene que haber visto algunos juicios de algunos políticos españoles, de estos de que, no, yo no sabía nada, yo no tenía información. Sí, yo soy el CEO, fundador, el rey del mambo, el joven menor de 30 años más millonario del mundo, pero yo no sé nada, yo no sé nada. Usted tiene que entender que yo tengo acceso limitado a la información. Pero vamos a ver, ¿estamos locos o qué? O sea, él de verdad quiere que pretenda que nos creamos eso. Y si eso fuese cierto, es un nivel de negligencia pero tan terrible. Y recordemos que, bueno, depende de la jurisdicción, pero la negligencia, es decir, cuando se comete un delito, el delito se puede cometer por dolo o negligencia. Es decir, uno puede cometer un delito queriendo cometerlo, ¿no? Por supuesto, pero también puedes cometer un delito por haber incurrido en tal grado de irresponsabilidad a la hora de ejercer el cargo que tú estás ejerciendo o hacer lo que tenías que hacer, que esa irresponsabilidad, esa negligencia resulta ser punible, ¿no? Y en este caso, o está mintiendo y sí sabía, o de verdad estamos hablando de un grado de negligencia tan grave que es que sí, no hay como, o sea, bueno, también depende de la jurisdicción estadounidense, en este caso la jurisdicción que aplique, esto lo desconozco, pero vamos, bueno, terrible.
What it seems like happened is in the middle of the year, a lot of, most of the borrow lending desks in the space blew out or closed down. And it seems like Alameda had, margin positions opened with them, and that it likely moved a bunch of that over to FTX this year when they shut down. And that means, I think it was over-collateralized positions, but positions that involve substantial size and substantial US dollar size on the borrow side. In terms of the accounting mistake, again, looking through what happened, I think that there is a substantial discrepancy between what the financials were, what the audited financials were, the true financials, what the exchange understood. All of that was consistent, versus what the dashboards that we had displayed for Alameda's account there, which substantially underdisplayed the size of that position. And so that's one of the reasons that I was surprised when we dug into everything at how big that position
¡Estaba
was.
sorprendido!
But would you would agree
¡Oh,
that
sorpresa!
there is a much
¡Wow!
more closely connected
¡Wow!
version of FTX International
¡Hemos
and
quebrado!
Alameda than previously understood? Fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, given the size of the position,
La plata del exchange apareció en mi cuenta bancaria personal.
In intention, it was in effect tied together substantially more than I would have ever wanted it to be.
So, you did an interview earlier this summer with Bloomberg, and you were asked about the connection between Alameda and FTX, and you said
La entrevista de Bloomberg en la que hizo mierda a KuCoin.
the same place because it started that way, and the same original people. But most of the remaining nexuses, you said, have dropped off.
Yep.
I know the people from Alameda decently well, almost as if you don't know what's happening there. And there isn't like a large amount, of ways remain that we are actively working together. Anything like that, Alameda is a wholly separate entity. They're different offices, like different principal offices. We don't have any shared personnel. We're also not the same company. We not all are under the same corporate umbrella or anything like that. And yet it seems like Alameda people were living in the same penthouse where you may very well be right now, all together.
Gracias. Efectivamente.
Most of Alameda was not there. I don't live there now, but not there now. I have not lived there for much of the time. But I did live with one or two members of Alameda for a little while. And I'll also say that as I was earlier this summer looking at the relationship, and this is a pretty big mistake and oversight of mine. I was viewing it primarily from the trading volume perspective because that's what drives our revenue. And so when I was
Yo me fijaba en el volumen de
how
trade, ya está.
intertwined our FTX and Alameda,
no sé.
I was looking at, well, what fraction of trading volume, what fraction of liquidity on the platform does Alameda represent? That had fallen off from something like 45% in 2019 to something like 2% this year. But in terms of positions and balances, it was a much larger fraction. I hadn't been looking at that.
Yo no soy psicólogo. No lo soy, pero bueno, algo entiendo por la carrera que estudié. Algunas cosas esenciales de psicología entiendo. Y quiero que me comentéis, aquellas personas que tenéis experiencia, si tenéis conocimientos médicos, si sois psicólogos o psiquiatras o algún tipo de instrucción en temas de psicología. Pero es muy interesante el lenguaje no verbal de este señor, pero también la forma en la que hace las pausas, en las que se traban algunas cosas. ¿Visteis esta última explicación? La hacía viendo a la cámara, la hacía con confianza, con fluidez, sin lo hacía todo de corrido. Porque probablemente eso último que estaba diciendo, en cuanto a la parte técnica, lo que estaba diciendo era cierto. Pero el resto de la entrevista, si os dais cuenta, la mayor parte del tiempo está hecho pequeño, está con los hombros encogidos, mirando para abajo. Lo que a mí me hace pensar que la mayor parte de las cosas que está diciendo son mentiras. O que no siendo mentira está escondiendo algo. Porque está en una posición como diciendo, no, si yo soy un pobrecito, de verdad, mira, créeme, de verdad, uy, Dios mío, estoy muy acongojado. Pero cuando explica algo que sí sabe responder y que sí es verdad lo que está diciendo, como que se viene un poquito arriba, mira la cámara y ahí sí, fluidísimo, ¿verdad? Ahí sí es súper elocuente el señor. Veis que hay como dos facetas en la personalidad de este sujeto a la hora de hablar. Insisto, yo no soy psicólogo, o sea que tampoco podría yo aquí venir a hacer diseccionar, hacer esto así, ¿no? Explicarlo de forma muy técnica, pero creo que es algo que me gustaría que lo que sí entienden de esta materia comenten, porque sí me parece que es relevante, ¿no? La diferencia de comportamiento o de forma de decir cuando habla de una cosa o cuando habla de otras, ¿no? Es bastante curioso,
On the platform does Alameda represent? That had fallen off from something like 45% in 2019 to something like 2% this year.
Vamos, que me parece un mal mentiroso.
Positions and balances, it was a much larger fraction. I hadn't been looking at that. That's a pretty big oversight.
But Sam, I think the question is whether you were supposed to have access to these accounts to begin with. You know, if I worked at a bank and was a bank teller, and I decided to leave the bank at the end of the evening and take the cash that I ostensibly had access to, even if I intended to bring it back to the bank later, even with more money to give them back, I still stole the money.
Este tío sabe.
I mean, look, I wasn't running Alameda. I didn't know exactly what was going on. I didn't know the size of their position. A lot of these are things I've learned over the last month that I learned as I was sort of frantically digging into this on, you know, November 6th, November 7th, November 8th.
La pierna, es verdad.
And obviously that's a pretty big mistake on Mark. That's a pretty big oversight that I wasn't more aware. I think I was, you know, scared of, I was nervous because of the conflict of interest about being too involved. And obviously that shouldn't have meant that I didn't have oversight, or that it really shouldn't have meant that I failed to appoint anyone to be in charge of that oversight, that relationship. But I haven't been running Alameda. I haven't been, you know, thinking about its finances.
Mentira, es una mentira cochina lo que está diciendo. Sabía todo. ¿Cómo se le ve que lo sabía todo? Mentira cochina. Está mintiendo, pero como un niño malcriado de 5 años, ¿eh?
I was a large owner of it. That is true.
El otro no sabe qué hacer, ya se va a descojonar el entrevistador. Qué cochinada de mentira.
So why wouldn't you have been focused on it if in fact that's actually where the profits were?
Well, I don't know that that's where, I mean, I think Alameda had made trading profits over the last few years, but FTX had made profits as well. FTX had been a, you know, profitable growing business. And that was more than a full-time job. I didn't have the bandwidth to run 2 companies at once. I had you know, attention for it. And again, I was nervous about a conflict of interest between those two, and so was pretty intentional about not being very involved in what was happening at Alameda.
When did the commingling of assets begin?
So,
¿Cuándo comenzó el mamoneo? La pregunta.
And again, you know, lots of traders had open margin positions on FTX where they would have borrows of assets, where they would be short some asset against, you know, against other assets as collateral. That being said, again, looking through this now, I think that position size for Alameda got substantially larger over the course of 2022, and that it was, I think, substantially larger by October of 2022, you know, probably by July of 2022 than it had been in April.
But it sounds like it's fair to say that there was always a connection between Alameda and FTX, and almost, I mean, not almost, but from the very, very beginning, and then it never really
Gracias. Una estatua al entrevistador, por favor.
Well,
Una estatua hay que hacerle.
Gracias. In some ways, reducing. I mean, when you scroll back to 2019, Alameda and FTX were very connected in a number of ways. You know, one of these was that Alameda was the primary liquidity provider on FTX. It was, you know, 40-something% of volume. It was the backstop liquidity provider.
El entrevistador está como diciendo, ¿qué cojones me está contando este señor? Mirarle la cara al entrevistador.
It was down to 2% of volume.
Mirarle la cara al entrevistador.
Backstop liquidity providers. But it still had a big margin position on. And I was failing to pay nearly enough attention to positions and positional risk on the exchange, and to Alameda's in particular. And I also, frankly, made a mistake that I feel pretty embarrassed to have made.
Muy avergonzado.
I substantially underestimated what the scale of a market crash could look like, and what the speed of it could look like, and how correlated it would be.
But that just suggests that you were just hoping, perhaps hoping against hope, that this would all work out and that nobody therefore would realize what this commingling was all about?
So it's not how I viewed it. And in particular, again, most of the firms had margin positions. Most of the firms had borrows on FTX. The problem here, this was too big. It was, I was surprised by the size of what it was.
But it's not just too big. It's assets that, look, it sounds like there were assets that may have been allowable to be loaned. But then there were assets that weren't allowable to be loaned, no?
So
Qué
I'm
vergüenza
still
este
looking into the
espectáculo.
details of some pieces of this, but I do think that
Qué bochorno.
in addition to what I had seen as sort of law of the standard borrows here, that when we scroll back to 2018, or to 2019, I guess, FTX didn't have bank accounts. It didn't have any bank accounts globally. We were trying to get them. It took us a while, took us a few years. And there are customers who wanted to wire money to FTX. And so I think in the meantime, some of them were wiring money to Alameda Research to get credited on FTX. And I think that was a substantial sum.
Bueno, ¿y la plata?
And I think that the FTX's internal accounting did correctly, effectively try to debit Alameda for those funds, but it didn't happen in the primary account. And so it didn't happen, it created a discrepancy between the display of the account and what was really going on there. And I'm still looking into exactly how that worked mechanically. But that did make that position size substantially larger than I thought, and I think than what you would have gotten from most of the normal avenues.
What do you make of the argument that Alameda was used to effectively wash money into FTX? That American investors, who by the way were not allowed to even invest on FTX, were doing so, and FTX was doing it knowingly because the know your customer rules were being flouted by using this separate vehicle.
How would that allow customers to flout the know your customer rules? Are you talking about people who are trading on FTX US, or are you talking about customers of FTX International?
International. You just said that there was money being sent to Alameda, and that Alameda was then providing credits onto FTX.
Right. But those users still have
to know
their customer policy on FTX in order to do that. In order to use that ramp, customers still had to go through FTX's normal KYC onboarding.
So, when do you think you knew there was a problem?
A ver, esta buena pregunta, ¿Cuándo hay un problema? ¿Cuándo empezó el problema?
The time that I really knew there was a problem was November 6th.
6 de noviembre.
November 6th was that was the date that the tweet
el 6 de noviembre
came out, and
ese fue el día que nos dimos cuenta nosotros también, creo.
By late on November 6th, we were putting together all of the data, putting together all the information that obviously I should have
enteramos nosotros
put
antes.
Together way earlier. That obviously should have been part of the dashboards. I was always
el día que se dio cuenta 60.
And when we looked at that, there was a potential serious problem there. And Alameda's position was big on FTX. It had just taken a huge hit. It had taken hits over the course of the year, but that was a particularly, large and one and very abrupt. And we're seeing a run on the bank start, and that was leading to, $4 billion a day of client withdrawals. At that point, we started calling prospective, sources of financing because I was nervous about what was going to happen there. If you rewind even a few days, I was a little bit nervous, but not on nearly the same scale. And I was thinking about, risks that were substantially less.
When you say you were nervous, you were nervous the company was going to go under, you were nervous you were going to get caught. What were you nervous about?
On November 6th or before then?
Either.
So I think before then, what I was nervous about was that basically, and this started, I would say, November 2nd or so, when there was, Alameda balance sheet, through CoinDesk, and when I started to think a bit more about this, I was nervous that that would lead to substantial losses for Alameda, and that it would be a bit messy. I didn't think it was existential for FTX. I didn't think it was going to lead to a massive loss for FTX's customers. I was thinking of this as more like Alameda is going to be really tight on funds, and that maybe it would end up having some small impact on FTX, but not a significant one, not one that hurt customers at all. When you're talking about November 6th, late November 6th, then, and especially as we bleed into November 7th and 8th, I start to become nervous that FTX is not going to be able to fill customer withdrawals. And by late November 6th, I am very nervous about that, and I'm starting to think about like emergency scenarios, and I'm starting to think about like things might end quite badly.
La entrevista dura 1 hora y 13 minutos. La voy a poner abajo para si la queréis ver completa. La verdad es que más o menos la dinámica de las entrevistas es así, el entrevistador contundentemente haciendo preguntas pues bastante importantes, bastante significativas y bastante bien planteadas. Sam se muestra la mayor parte de las respuestas nervioso, dubitativo. En otras respuestas en las que sí tiene una mayor claridad sobre lo que está hablando, pues o que no estaría mintiendo, se muestra más, y lo vimos, ¿no? Vimos esa diferencia entre los dos Sams, ¿no? El Sam que está el que mira para abajo y el que mira a la cámara y responde, ¿no? Lo hemos visto en la misma entrevista, las dos facetas. Más de la primera que de la segunda, pero hemos visto ambas facetas. En todo caso, bueno, tendrá que haber un procedimiento, espero que haya algún procedimiento, se hagan los procedimientos judiciales correspondientes para que se determine si ha existido algún tipo de responsabilidad penal, ¿no? Por parte de las personas que estaban a cargo de esto, ya sea por dolo o por negligencia, o si no la hay, por supuesto, eso lo tendrá que determinar la justicia, no lo tenemos que determinar nosotros, y esperemos que los liquidadores o las personas que están llevando a cabo el proceso de bancarrota puedan llevar a buen término la posibilidad de que los usuarios puedan recuperar los fondos, porque en este momento también voy a decir una cosa, independientemente de lo que diga Sam, él es fundador de FTX y ex CEO, pero ya no es el CEO de FTX. Esto va a depender ahora de las personas que están llevando a cabo el proceso de bancarrota. Así que bueno, os voy a dejar el enlace para que lo podáis ver. Pero en todo caso, bochornoso espectáculo. Interesante, eso sí, para conocer un poquito más al personaje y cuáles son las opiniones que tiene, pero desgraciadamente no aporta a lo largo de la entrevista ninguna luz acerca de cómo se van a poder solucionar las cosas. Tampoco dependen de él a este punto ya, ¿no? Pero bueno, no arroja demasiada luz y alega constantemente desconocimiento acerca de lo que estaba pasando, alega ignorancia, alega no haberse enterado. Yo sinceramente pongo en duda eso, yo creo que se enteraba bastante más de lo que dice enterarse. Pero bueno, la justicia tendrá que decidir.